Welcome to the third episode of Foreign Correspondents Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined, as always, by
Sebastian Smoliński, hello.
And we are here to discuss Alfred Hitchcock's films one by one. We release an episode every 3 weeks, and thank you so much for all the wonderful comments that you sent after our second episode concerning The Lodger. And now we are embarking on a mission to discuss the third film in the Alfred Hitchcock canon. Just some information, you can follow us, and we actually encourage you to do so on Facebook. Our fan page is Foreign Correspondents Deeper into Hitchcock. And also, you can reach us by email, and our email address is
hitchcock.podcast@gmail.com. Please write to us.
Exactly. So, Sebastian, let's plunge into Downhill. This is the third film that survives. We already mentioned in the second episode The Mountain Eagle, which is sort of the holy grail of lost films. Maybe one day, hopefully during our lifetimes, it will be discovered. But now let's plunge into Downhill, a film that was that stars Ivor Novello, our good friend from The Lodger. It doesn't only star him; it was also co-written by him. It is based on a play, and actually Ivor Novello is not mentioned as the writer of the screenplay and of the play in the opening credits. There's a very strange name that appears in the opening credits of this film.
Literally strange. This is David Lestrange or Lestrange, if we want to have the French pronunciation. Which is a nickname of a couple of writers, right?
It's Ivor Novello and Constance Collier who co-wrote the play, which was actually performed, and this is the basis, literally basis for this film. And speaking of typecasting, Ivor Novello, who, as we remember, played the Lodger and who was suspected of being the Avenger killer, and then in the end turned out to be the perfect son and brother who wanted to avenge the killing of his sister. Here, again, plays a very good son in a way, and a character that is ultimately innocent even though he goes astray. In Downhill, the story basically is that of a college student in England who takes the blame for something that his friend has done, which is the friend led astray or probably got a girl pregnant, and our character actually takes the blame for it. He doesn't reveal the fact that he is innocent. So this is and then his life, as in the title, goes downhill. He becomes broke, then he becomes an actor, and we'll discuss everything that happens in this podcast. But first of all, we have to say, and I will just state it brutally, Sebastian, is it a good film?
No, of course not. I mean, it's not a good movie, but let me start with two things, which I want to comment upon, because it's our third episode, so we're discussing his third surviving silent movie, and I must say that I find it very thrilling to talk about Hitchcock's silent movies because, of course, each of us prepares. I prepare a lot, trying to catch up with writings about Hitchcock. And despite the fact that there are more and more books published about Hitchcock, of course, every year, still his silent movies are not that well researched or explored or interpreted or commented upon. So there is this thrilling element of, we're discussing it maybe not as first people on earth, because of course not, but still there is a lot to say about these movies that wasn't said, or maybe that we not necessarily know, because these are kind of like obscure articles about the silent movies. So I would say that's one of the reasons why I think it's fun to talk about Downhill, which is certainly not one of Hitchcock's best movies. And it's a movie that Hitchcock did kind of by accident, in a way, because he wanted to transfer to other film studio, other production company. And he had this, let's say, several month hiatus at his own, at Gainsborough studio. But then he decided that when this transfer became unsuccessful, he decided that he cannot just wait, and he will make Downhill, which I think he didn't like the play from the very beginning, or at least he tells to Truffaut that it was a weak play.
Yes, and that's right before his move to BNP, British National Pictures, which then becomes British International Pictures. That's all true. The film. It is also very true that apparently he wasn't crazy about the film, as he states to Truffaut. However, I would say that I completely agree with you. I mean, to see those films, to revisit them, or to see them for the first time nowadays with those better copies available, especially on Blu-ray, it is a great adventure. And for me, I do remember when I first watched Downhill, it actually played on Polish television in early 2000s in a strange print or copy that had no music whatsoever. I do remember that because it was very strange to watch this film on television with no accompaniment whatsoever. And this was the print that ran only 90 minutes. Nowadays, you can, and this soundless, truly soundless print is still in circulation. You can get it on DVD in the British Hitchcock box set that came out, I guess, 10 years ago. However, don't get that box set if you can, because you should really get the Criterion disc of The Lodger, because on that very disc you have Downhill. It's as an extra, so it's really a double bill disc, I would say. And this print runs 110 minutes. So if you want to see Downhill, it's well, let's say glory, then definitely get the Blu-ray, the Criterion Blu-ray of The Lodger, and then you can see it with a new musical score composed by I'm trying to look Neil Brandt did the score for Downhill and for The Lodger. So yes, it's a perfect way to revisit those films, to see them. We also recommended you the book by Charles Barr, English Hitchcock. There's another book called Silent Films, actually Alfred Hitchcock's Silent Films, by Mark Raymond Strauss. I cannot really recommend that book. I mean, it does have its merit, but it's not that good. If you want to read something, you should stick to Barr and to other sources. Also, Sebastian, what sources on silent Hitchcock and on Hitchcock in general would you recommend? Because I guess this is our third episode, so it's a good moment for us to recommend to some of our listeners some valuable reading on Hitchcock. So reveal your readings. Like what did you read to prepare for this episode on Downhill, and who in general would you recommend to read on Hitchcock's early films?
There is a very interesting Alfred Hitchcock companion, which has some 600 pages, and there are lots of articles, not really about single movies, but more covering kind of like different areas of his work. And there is a chapter about silent movies, which is kind of significant that there is just one short chapter, but I think it's a great book because it's trying to show Hitchcock's works from different perspective. Of course, I'm reading Robin Wood's kind of magnum opus, we could say, or one of his most important books, which is Hitchcock's Films, or actually Hitchcock's Films Revisited, because this is the book he republished several times, so this is kind of like life's work, but famously he wasn't crazy about his British movies, and in this revisited book he writes more about Hitchcock English films, but actually he just writes about blackmail in a bigger detail. So that's what I'm reading right now.
Great. I also love that this podcast makes us actually read more stuff that we never read before and learn new things about Hitchcock. I really love it. Okay, Downhill. A melodrama, I guess. A melodrama would be the word to describe the movie. We already said what it's about. Ivor Novello playing schoolboy, playing rugby with other boys. As we know, Ivor Novello was gay in his life, and here when the first shot of him, visibly older, I would say, he doesn't look like a college boy.
He doesn't look like a college boy. He was, I think, around 30 at the time, so much older. And I would say what is also striking about him, that it may be a distant association once again, but his he's a bit similar, just plainly his face to Buster Keaton in a way. Of course, the expression is totally different.
Don't you mean Harold Lloyd? I was thinking of Harold Lloyd when I watched him, actually.
Maybe, but Novello has this we could say petite figure. He's a fragile small man in a way, right? Small in size wise, right? So I had this. I know it's a strange feeling, but I had this feeling he's kind of a Buster Keaton character. But of course, his acting style is totally different. But the first minutes of the movie remind me of college comedies that both Harold Lloyd and Keaton did, right?
Like The Freshman, for example.
And College by Buster Keaton. So we had this silent. It's a bit of a slapstick world, but I think Hitchcock didn't do it that well. I mean, he wasn't a director who could indulge in silent slapstick.
Well, I absolutely agree, but also we have to remember that this is a British school, so it's very different visually from those American colleges that we know, for example, from The Freshman, which brings us to the incredible presence of architecture in this film, because this whole Gothic campus that they are at, it's definitely not American, it's definitely British, and they are moving through those spaces, and it's not a surprise that Hitchcock is sensitive to architecture, but they are moving through those very ecclesiastical like spaces, like those corridors, the Gothic. It's like they're living in a cathedral almost. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because there is some comedy. It's like, it's not Porky's, but it's like a little bit of this adolescent sexual comedy that unravels, beneath this respectable surface. And especially the moment when Hitchcock, who himself attended Jesuit school, presents the canteen and the meal being served to the boys. It's not an integrated school, it's only men, and the meal is being served, and there's actually a title that quotes a prayer in Latin, so it's a Latin title, so something for Catholic Hitchcock that he knew. This is pre-Vatican II church, so it was all in Latin, and there's also a nice moment when they are praying, and the girl who will bring so much trouble to the boys, first of all, one of the boys will bring much trouble to her, is actually nudging the guy with her shoe. So she's sort of like, taking him away from the world of prayer into the world of sex, which made me think of a little bit of this prayer scene in Pleasure Garden when the dog licking the girl's feet. Again, it's prayer and feet, like as the sort of sexual element. And then there's this sort of strange party scene, like the party at the back of the store, the two guys and the girl, this beads, the sort of partition with the beads, and they are playing records. It's like a small orgy scene, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, Hitchcock really, in both in The Pleasure Garden, in The Lodger, he was really into, I think, ménage à trois, right? It's a convenient tool, just to show three characters competing with each other. In this case, it's like two boys competing for a girl, or maybe not really competing. It's like she really likes Ivor Novello. I mean, who wouldn't? He's really shown as a very cute boy and a very lovable guy, and he will become captain of the team, of the rugby team in the next scene. So right, and there's beautiful image because they are kind of their silhouettes are cut by the light which comes from the store, and they almost kiss in this scene. But once again, this is the way this movie is plotted is really strange, and it really doesn't adapt too much, I would say. But I want to comment also about the scene with a boy, because once again I had this feeling in The Lodger that there are these Chaplin touches, which of course maybe in my eye, not in Hitchcock's eye, but there's this very nice scene when the Ivor Novello is kind of playing this shop clerk, and he's selling a boy some chocolates at a very cheap price, and he's creating this kind of magical world that you can, for a dime, you can buy, like a big box of chocolate. And I also find it kind of Chaplin-esque. I wonder if it was conscious on Hitchcock's part, but maybe that's not most important now. But certainly he creates Novello as this very lovable guy, someone that we want to empathize. But maybe later I will say that I had some problems with this hero's construction.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a quite warm scene. I wouldn't say it's as warm as a Chaplin moment, because I guess in Chaplin the boy would be adorable. Here the boy is sort of like a street urchin and he's not likable. But probably the boy also reflects, and the whole setting reflects, some kind of a recollection of Hitchcock's milieu where he grew up, because this is after all a store, and Hitchcock grew up as a grocery owner son, so he would be often behind the counter, and also I guess the Hitchcock probably identifies with the hungry boy who wants sweets, because as we know, Hitchcock loved food and was quite conspicuous about his gluttony. So there's a lot of that. There's sort of this also prankish side that, again, we will discuss on this podcast, those nasty jokes that Hitchcock did to other people. And here also, like the guy in the canteen spitting with I guess it's peas or something, and hitting people, or throwing the stuff into their drinks. There's this whole side to Hitchcock that's not very appealing. It's sort of mischievous, but in a sadistic way. But yes, the whole seduction, I guess, scene, this ménage à trois, as you said, is interestingly put. There will be more interesting, strange menages, I would say, in Hitchcock's film later. I mean, in a way, whole Rear Window is a way of a menage, and Rope and other films. Well, we'll go into that later on. But I mean, I think that the movie didn't age well. We will discuss some sequences that are still standouts. But because it's such a Victorian melodrama, I mean, the whole notion of this guy taking the blame for his friend not to betray the friendship, it's almost like this monomaniacal, almost like Conradian sense of honor that you cannot, like Lord Jim or something like that you cannot, betray your friend, even though the friend is a louse and maybe he raped the girl or he only got her pregnant. We don't know that. It's actually not revealed. But then, the guy goes to the very lower depths of humanity. He becomes a gigolo. Like, what did you think of those moments when he's revealed as first an actor and then a gigolo, playing dancing with older women?
I would say it's kind of embarrassing. These are, as we could say nowadays, like these cringe moments. So I agree. And so what is interesting in this movie is that, of course, it's mostly discussed as an example of Hitchcock doing his best with a mediocre material, right? That we can discuss several scenes, for example, at the headmaster office, which is really brilliantly done, with a full of tension. But what I find funny is that this tension surrounds a very simple scene in a way. So like, it's almost like if somebody was about to be shot or killed or strangled in that scene, but it's just a simple conversation, which of course ends very badly for the hero. But still, I think that the means that Hitchcock uses are a bit over the top. But on the other hand, it's time of his experiments, narrative, stylistic experiments. So it's really this scene and the others like that Hitchcock really put a lot of effort to construct, save this movie in a way. But for example, we don't know why he should behave that way. You mentioned this Conradian notion, which is which may be there, but still their friendship is not really established, because if it begins as a buddy movie, we don't see their bond or their mutual friendship. It's not really established in any of the scenes. We know they live together as roommates, but I think we don't feel that their relationship is something more than just two random friends.
Yeah, and this touches upon number of Hitchcock's issues. It will be very difficult actually to find a convincingly shown male friendship in Hitchcock's films. I mean, it either steers into this creepy homosexual terrain of Rope, where friendship is actually something more, but also is presented by Hitchcock with some kind of suspicion, or those strained relationships between men, which are friends but they're arguing all the time, like James Stewart and Wendell Corey in Rear Window, for example. They were war buddies, but they are not really getting along. So it's very interesting that you pointed this out, because actually, yes, this is true. This friendship is not believable here in this film, and it's much more often than a true friendship is being shown in Hitchcock between a man and a woman. The woman is usually desexualized in such friendship, like Scotty and Barbara Bel Geddes in Vertigo, for example. But no, it's very, very difficult to find like actual male friendship in Hitchcock, and this is a huge problem that you pointed out. We don't believe in the friendship, so then this huge sacrifice that he makes for this friend, I mean, it's very Victorian, but it's very unconvincing, I think, even on Victorian terms. So this is one thing. But as we said before, and as you indicated, there are those brilliant moments, those little touches. For example, the scene with the headmaster, as you said, like with the moving camera and setting up of suspense. For me, I guess one of the really interesting things about the movie and also moments is the uses of architecture and space. Like the Ivor Novello character Roddy Berwick, he's thrown first into this Gothic architecture, then he's in the sinful architecture of the city. But also there's this fantastic scene, and I don't think it's discussed enough, even in the books that we read. The scene when the whole place where the dancing is taking place, the gigolo place, suddenly sunlight comes into the whole ballroom, and all those older women and older men who basically have been like playing with their lust are suddenly exposed by the sun, and the character looks at them and they are pathetic, those old bodies, like it's almost like a Bosch painting, of those cringing old bodies, very Catholic imagination again, like this, almost like a dark room that suddenly becomes illuminated. So that tells you also something about Hitchcock's notion of sensuality, of sin, that it's all a sinful place, people are ugly and engaging in their instincts. It's one of those moments that really reveals Hitchcock's visual thinking.
Yes, it's like bathtub scene from The Shining, where the woman turns out not to be the 20-year or something. So yes, you're right, but also so it's brilliant from, let's say, director's point of view, or like the film technique point of view, but also this movie, and we must say that because it's really shouting at you, it's really offensive towards women. It's basically it's almost unbelievably offensive, because you mentioned it's a melodrama. I would say it's also this kind of Bildungsroman. So the story about a boy growing up. He abandons his, let's say, warm, sheltered life in this convent-like school, and he goes out into the world to experience different things. And he experiences... he goes through different situations with women, but all of them are really nasty. And the scene you mentioned, it's really striking, the way they are kind of the women in this ballroom are around to be ugly or older than they are. But also when you think about it nowadays, it's hard to imagine that somebody would do a scene like that and not be considered someone who's, like, for example, ageist, right?
Absolutely, yes. This is a very misogynistic film. Also, the older women that are sort of preying upon young Ivor Novello's flesh are shown as those old crowns. They are really ugly, and they are sort of punished by Hitchcock for their sexual desires by this very ungainly presentation. They are really unappealing to look at. But there's, I mean, as distasteful as it is, even as Hitchcock's, let's say, offensiveness, it's also interesting because, for example, when one of the women turns out a little bit more sympathetic, she is credited in the credits as poetess, and she talks to, actually, instead of just, treating him as a piece of flesh, or as Richard Gere in American Gigolo, she starts talking to him, she asks him questions, she seems sympathetic, and suddenly the sun bursts in, and suddenly she also is revealed as this old crone. So, yes, and then in this very showy sequence of delirium, all those women come back and they're laughing at him, and it's basically, I mean, given that Ivor Novello, was a homosexual, it's almost like, although the play was co-authored with a woman, but it's also like the whole play presents this very unflattering portrait of womanhood, and also of his wife who eats up his inheritance and then chews him up and leaves him on the side. So it's almost like he goes from this very male world of the playing rugby with the boys, and then he experienced everything that's terrible, and this is due to women. So he's in the very last scene, he's happy again under a pile of friends. Under a pile of other boys on the rugby field, and he's smiling. He's again in this all-male environment. So I guess there's an element of an anti-woman fantasy in this film.
Yes, and at the beginning we get to know the sister of his friend, and we see that she's interested in him, and that his father is kind of maybe sanctioning this future relationship between them. So we could treat this movie as a way of, him going through different experiences to finally land with the right girl. But that's not what's happening. This is something also, the number of inconsistencies in this movie, and the way it's not really going towards a credible finale is really interesting, because actually we have like this 3-act structure. So suddenly, he wakes up after his, let's say, humiliation, and after his father's rejection. And father it's a fascinating figure in this movie, because he's very, very strict. So in The Lodger, we had mother who at her deathbed was saying to him that you must avenge my daughter and your sister. So we had this maternal figure, which was frightening in a way, because it's really, I would say it's terrible when somebody gives you this burden at your deathbed, right? So the mother figure in The Lodger is really ambiguous, and here we have the father who doesn't trust his son at all. The actor is Norman McKinnell, and he's really using his facial expressions to show that he's a very very strong paternal figure. And it's, once again, I don't find it credible, even if we count that Victorian upbringing was strict, right? I don't believe that a father who in the first scene is complimented by the headmaster that you must bring us more sons like your son, right? So he should be proud, and then it's just one gossip and suddenly, or one situation, and he believes that his son is a villain, actually. So that's also not really credible, and it ends this first part of the movie. And then we come to this the first scene of the second act, which is very cleverly made.
Yes, the only thing I would add is that the whole notion of Victorian melodrama was sort of to over stress and sort of literalize all the moral rules of the society. So here we cannot understand this film, even in its imperfect form, when we don't take into account the Victorian notion of honor and of purity, right? So if we do take it into account, it's possibly a little bit more credible for a father to behave in this way. But even though, I mean, this film is highly literal, I would say. It's probably the most literal use of a title in a film by Hitchcock, because there's this famous scene when he literally goes downhill, the Ivor Novello character, and here Hitchcock uses the London Underground, and the Novello walks onto the escalator, and the escalator in a very long shot. It's almost, like I don't know, Tsai Ming-liang shot, that he actually goes down the escalator, and we see him receding from our look into the pit. So this is the very, very literal sort of Catholic Christian, Judeo-Christian image of someone being engulfed in a abyss. So this is and this actually Hitchcock was sort of coy in the conversation with Truffaut by saying that, this is a very naive shot, there's something like that. But it is naive. It's also quite striking. It's memorable. This is actually the only shot that I remember from the entire film from many years ago when I watched the film. This was the only shot that I remembered. So everything else I forgot. So I guess in its very literal way, it works. But do you see this film, especially knowing that Hitchcock was sort of in transition between one studio and the other? Can you trace any laziness here, or do you think that Hitchcock is like this professional director who, even given the silly material, he gives it his best. He really invests himself in it.
Well, I must say I don't see laziness, particularly when we consider, this is maybe something interesting for our listeners, that if we consider that Downhill in its current version is 110 minutes, then it's the longest Hitchcock movie up to Rebecca and Foreign Correspondent, actually. So it's really long, and of course for us nowadays to watch a silent movie which is not very good and it's almost 2 hours, it's a challenge. But I think for not only for Hitchcock fans but for people who just like to observe, the mise en scène, there is a lot to. This movie has a lot to offer. So I think Hitchcock really probably, maybe it's not my opinion even, but if we say that Downhill is exercise of a director who just wanted to make better and better movies, then of course it's very interesting. And you mentioned the architecture, which I want to come back to that, because if we say that this going down the escalator is naive, then images of him, in a desolate space, they are not really naive. In this at the campus, school campus, he's shown as a single figure. He's the only one going in the corridor, and it's really striking. It's really this kind of this massive walls surround him. So I would say it's a very effective, simple and great way of showing his maybe not loneliness but his alienation and solitude in this scene. So it's a very visual movie, and it's funny because we know it's based on a play, but it has much less intertitles than The Lodger, and I think Hitchcock is using intertitles only when he wants to separate one act from the other, and in a really random occasions. So there is really little dialogue, and I think it's even sometimes not that easy to grasp the meaning of some conversations, because he's really not showing us the intertitles. And I think I like to watch silent movies, so I'm a bit accustomed to this style, to this language, and I think that more typical production would have more intertitles.
I agree, and also I agree about the use of architecture. When he leaves the school, he's completely by himself. There is no one else in the entire lawn, so he's by himself in the corridor, he's by himself on the lawn, he's by himself on this escalator. There are no other people in London Underground, so it's all Hitchcock setting up the scene. He's very, and he will actually mention this later on in his life, his interviews, that he was often trying to find those very abstract images of a human figure in a space, like for example in an empty space, like Cary Grant on this cornfield in North by Northwest, for example, right? It's a very abstract image, like this lonely human figure, and here you also see this. There are also those playful uses of camera that I think that he was actually having fun on the set devising. They are not easy to execute, like this sort of fake shot when we first see Ivor Novello in a suit, in a very elegant suit, and we think, oh, probably he has money again. Then the camera is receding and we see, oh, he's a waiter, and then the camera is receding even more, and oh, he's actually playing in a play on a stage. So Hitchcock is playing with us in terms of presentation. And also this whole delirium scene, which as for example Charles Barr points out in his book, is it's delirium without blurry images. It's only montage, dissolves. I don't think the delirium is very effective, I would say. I mean, for me it didn't convey like his fear that much, but you can see Hitchcock at work, and you can see him thinking out ideas, and you can see that he's a purely visual filmmaker. He often made this comment about silent cinema being the purely visual form, and he is almost like he's a visual designer. He's thinking in terms of visual design and not, as you said, titles. I mean, he likes to set up those elaborate, beautiful shots. Last time we talked about The Lodger. Every time he places, for example, the dead bodies on screen, like the dead body of the girl at the beginning, it's always a striking composition. So I think this film, again, a weak story, but it reveals Hitchcock's striking visual sense.
Yes, I would say he's a designer, certainly, but he's also a translator, and it's certainly you can see that in his silent movies especially, and it may look a bit naive sometimes from today's perspective. You mentioned the escalator scene, but he's really translating, thoughts also very often in The Lodger and Downhill. He's translating thoughts into images, into a series of images, which kind of shows us how he used Soviet montage, right? He's not using Soviet techniques to persuade us to some political option. He's not creating, of course, radical cinema. So as Robin Wood mentioned, he's kind of cutting the roots of these techniques. So he's not doing political cinema. He's using Soviet style, so this collecting different images and making some kind of rhetoric out of them. He's using that to the bourgeois means, which is funny because that's the way of subverting Soviet style in a way. And you can see that in Downhill, and this the delirium scene. Maybe it's not fantastic, but certainly it's very interesting that he did it without this blaring or showing the transition, because in Spellbound, for example, we would have a lot of that. So in the 1940s, in Spellbound, in his Hollywood movie, the Hollywood style will be so well established and that strong that he would have to show the transition. But in this case, he can still experiment. Maybe this, let's say, British or international style of making movies is a bit more flexible. So I would say you feel something fresh in this movie. And in one way, it really moves me, like maybe even a bit personally, because it's, once again, we didn't say that of course it's you can tell from the description of the plot that it's a movie about a man wrongly accused once again. So there is this strong feeling of guilt that he has to somehow manage, and I found this part convincing, that it's a kind of another tormented hero. Maybe that's my view of Ivor Novello as this very fragile man. But what is really starts to be really irritating in this 110-minute movie is that the protagonist doesn't have a lot of agency, and I think it's very frustrating for the viewers nowadays, and that the movie could really would be much better if this character would be more active.
Yes, absolutely. But also, I think this story couldn't happen nowadays because the Victorian morals are no longer here, and really, it's difficult to establish what means to fall into disrepute nowadays. I mean, here you have very clear signifiers of disrepute, something like this strange bar somewhere in Marseille, and it's all very clear way of indicating the social fall. Nowadays it's much more complicated, I would say. What does it mean to go up and down? Here, downhill is very clearly indicated. What does it mean to go downhill? I agree, and I guess by means of closing this episode, I would say that even in those, and we will have some movies ahead of us, especially in the silent period, that are not masterpieces, but are, again, interesting. And we are not leaving 1927 yet, because there are 4 films made in 1927 by Hitchcock. Downhill opened in May of 1927. And in the next episode, we will discuss Easy Virtue, which opened in August 1927. And then there will be 2 more 1927 films. So we have 4 films in this year. And next time it will be Easy Virtue with Isabel Jeans, who actually played a part in Downhill. She played Julia. Isabel Jeans will star in Easy Virtue as Larita. And we will see what's that story all about next time. So we hope you enjoyed our discussion of Downhill in the 3rd episode of our podcast, and please tune in, listen to us on Spotify, on different platforms, and also follow our Facebook fan page. And our podcast is, and we are, Foreign Correspondents.
Deeper into Hitchcock. Thank you very much, and let's keep in touch.